When my son married, I wanted to bless him with the same start in life that my husband and I had once dreamed of. A beautiful villa, spacious, sunlit, built with years of sacrifice and love, handed over with nothing asked in return but respect and care. At first, it seemed perfect. He and his wife settled in happily, sending smiling photos, inviting me over for coffee. But slowly, things changed. First, her parents stayed over for a weekend, then a month, then her cousins, her siblings, friends of friends, all treating the villa like a communal resort. When I visited, my name barely got a polite nod, my place in their lives shrinking into nothing more than a guest in the home I had given. I knew I couldn't stand by forever. One dinner, one carefully chosen sentence, and everything changed. Bags packed, cars loaded, my son's in-laws out the door, leaving behind the lesson that generosity without boundaries invites its own kind of betrayal. Have you ever given someone everything only to watch them take even more? Share your story in the comments and subscribe for more powerful true life tales of dignity, quiet strength, and unforgettable moral victories. From the time my son Daniel was born, my greatest dream was to give him a foundation stronger than the one I had been given. My husband and I worked tirelessly for decades, long hours, modest vacations, careful savings, all so we could one day pass on something meaningful. The villa wasn't just a house. It was the crown jewel of our sacrifices, a symbol of every small choice we made to secure Daniel's future. Nestled on a quiet street lined with towering oaks, it had wide verandas perfect for evening talks, a garden that bloomed with bursts of color each spring, and sun-soaked rooms that felt like an embrace. When Daniel married, I decided it was time. I didn't want him burdened by mortgage payments or trapped in the endless cycle of renting. I wanted him to start his new life with a gift that meant security, pride, and hope. I handed him the keys in a simple ceremony. No grand speeches, no strings attached, just a mother's love wrapped in wood and stone. At first, it seemed like everything I had hoped for. Daniel and his new wife, Anna, settled in happily, sending me photos of their Sunday brunches, their newly adopted dog napping by the fireplace, the small herb garden they planted by the kitchen window. When I visited, they welcomed me warmly, and my heart swelled with quiet satisfaction every time I crossed the threshold. I believed, perhaps foolishly, that this gift had been received with the same spirit in which it had been given. It wasn't long, however, before little things began to shift. Anna's parents came to visit for a weekend, not unusual, and of course I was happy to know that both sides of the family were close. But the weekend stretched into a week, and then two. I brushed aside my concerns, telling myself it was only temporary. Maybe they were helping the newlyweds settle in. Maybe there was a family situation I wasn't aware of. But then, her younger brother arrived with his duffel bag slung over his shoulder, and the guest bedroom became his new home base. Shortly after that, Anna's cousins came for a short holiday and stayed through an entire season. Every time I visited, the house was fuller, noisier, the faces around the table less familiar, the energy shifting from a cozy home to a crowded hostel. Still, I said nothing. I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere. I had given the house freely. I had trusted Daniel to make it his own. But with every visit, the ache in my chest grew heavier. The first time I truly felt like a stranger in my own gift was one Sunday afternoon when I stopped by with a pie, a simple gesture I had done countless times. I knocked, balancing the warm pie carefully in my hands. The door opened, but it wasn't Daniel or Anna. It was Anna's mother, who smiled politely but didn't invite me in. She took the pie, thanked me, and shut the door with a click that echoed in my ears long after I had turned back to my car. I sat in the driveway for a long time, staring at the home that had once been filled with my dreams, now brimming with people who barely knew my name. I wanted to believe Daniel didn't see what was happening, that he was caught up in the joy, of newlywed life, that he didn't realize the slow invasion that had turned his home into someone else's domain. But deep down, I knew better. I knew he saw. And worse, I knew he was letting it happen, whether out of love for Anna or a simple unwillingness to confront the creeping disrespect that had taken root. The bitterness gnawed at me, but it wasn't anger that kept me awake at night. It was heartbreak. I had given freely, and in return I had been quietly pushed aside. Not maliciously, perhaps, but carelessly, which sometimes stings even more. I thought long and hard about what to do. Part of me wanted to storm into the house, demand answers, take back what was mine. But another part, quieter, wiser, understood that real power doesn't shout. Real power is calm, measured, and unmistakable. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want to hurt Daniel or Anna. I simply wanted to reclaim my dignity, to remind them with undeniable clarity that generosity is not the same as permission to be forgotten. So I waited. I planned. I chose my moment carefully, because when I finally spoke, it wouldn't be out of rage. It would be a single measured line that would leave no room for argument, no room for further disrespect. One line to remind them of everything they had forgotten. One line to reclaim the space my love had built. The days leading up to that decisive moment passed slowly, each one pressing harder on my heart as I watched from the sidelines, invisible in a home built by my hands. I visited less often now, not because I wanted to, but because every visit carved a little deeper into the realization that I had been quietly erased. On the rare occasions I did stop by, it was always the same. Strange cars lined the driveway. Unfamiliar faces peered through the windows. Voices I didn't recognize filled the rooms that once echoed only with Daniel's laughter. It became clear to me that Anna's family had woven themselves so tightly into the fabric of the house that Daniel no longer even questioned it. What had started as hospitality had morphed into entitlement. They moved through the villa like owners, hosting barbecues in the backyard, remodeling parts of the kitchen without so much as a phone call to let me know. They had planted new shrubs I never would have chosen, rearranged furniture that once held memories I treasured, even replaced the worn, beloved welcome mat at the front door with something cheap and gaudy that shouted, "Home, sweet home," as if the house had always belonged to them. And through it all, Daniel remained silent, smiling nervously whenever I visited, as if willing me to look away from the obvious and just let it be. I understood his discomfort. Daniel had always been the type to avoid confrontation, to smooth over rough edges even when it cost him dearly. But this was different. This wasn't a small misunderstanding or a personality clash. This was my gift being treated like a convenience, my sacrifice being swallowed up without a shred of gratitude. And the worst part, the part that hurt more than the crowded living room and the missing welcome mat, was the growing realization that Daniel had chosen their comfort over my dignity. Maybe not consciously, maybe not maliciously, but he had chosen it all the same. Each day, my resolve hardened a little more. I wouldn't storm in. I wouldn't yell. I wouldn't plead. I would wait for the right moment, and I would speak the truth with a calm so cold and sharp they would have no choice but to hear it. I had given them space to respect me. They had filled that space with thoughtlessness. Now, I would fill it with something they could not ignore. That opportunity came one warm Saturday afternoon. I received an invitation, a group barbecue, a casual family gathering at the villa. The irony wasn't lost on me. After months of being treated like a stranger, they wanted me to bring a dish, to come and smile politely at tables crowded with people who had pushed me out. I almost declined, almost erased the text without a second thought. But then I realized this was the perfect moment. I would go. I would bring something simple, something understated, and I would say what needed to be said, not in anger, but in undeniable truth. I spent the morning baking a batch of my late husband's favorite rolls, the ones Daniel used to beg for as a boy. It felt fitting somehow, bringing a piece of the past to this fractured present, a quiet reminder of the roots they had so easily forgotten. I arrived at the villa just as the laughter was beginning to spill out onto the front lawn. Strangers lounged in deck chairs I didn't recognize. Children I had never met splashed in the pool. The smell of grilled meat hung heavy in the air, masking the faint, bittersweet scent of jasmine that used to climb the trellis by the kitchen window. Anna greeted me first, her smile bright but brittle, like someone posing for a photograph they didn't want to be in. She barely glanced at the tray in my hands before ushering me inside. The house was even more crowded than I remembered, every surface cluttered with half-empty glasses and plates balanced precariously on armrests. I found Daniel near the patio door, talking to Anna's father about some renovation plans. Plans for a house that, on paper, still bore my name in the deeds and records. I waited until Daniel noticed me, until a hush fell over the immediate circle of people who had been laughing and planning and building their lives on ground they had not earned. I set the tray of rolls down on the nearest table and looked my son directly in the eye. In a calm and clear, I said, "I'm so glad everyone feels so at home here. It makes it even easier to explain that the villa will soon be listed for sale, starting next week." The silence that followed was instant and complete. Conversations froze mid-sentence. Forks hovered in the air. Anna's father's face was drained of color. Daniel blinked as if he hadn't heard me correctly, as if the words themselves didn't make sense. But they did, and I didn't flinch. I didn't offer apologies or explanations. I simply smiled, a small, steady smile, and added, "I gave this home out of love, but love does not mean allowing yourself to be forgotten." And with that, I turned, walked through the house one final time and left. My heart broke a little with each step, but it also healed. I had reclaimed not just my villa, but myself. The fallout from that afternoon came fast and sharp, like the sudden break of a heavy storm. Within hours of my quiet declaration, my phone buzzed with missed calls, voicemails, and long, frantic text messages from Daniel. Some were confused, others defensive, a few even angry. He pleaded with me to reconsider, to think about how disruptive this would be for everyone. He begged me not to embarrass the family by putting the villa on the market. He insisted it wasn't as bad as it looked, that I was overreacting, that things would change if I just gave them a little more time. But I didn't answer. Not right. Away. I needed space. Space to protect the decision I had made with so much pain and clarity. I knew the temptation to fall back into old habits was strong, to rush in, to smooth things over, to put their comfort above my own dignity. But I also knew this was the moment that would define whether I truly honored myself or slipped back into the shadows of old patterns. The next morning, Daniel showed up at my doorstep. He looked tired, disheveled, a shadow of the confident young man who had once stood proudly accepting the villa keys from my hands. I let him in, motioned for him to sit at the kitchen table where so many important conversations had unfolded over the years. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The weight of unspoken things filled the room until Daniel finally broke the silence. "Mom," he said quietly, "you blindsided us." His voice wasn't angry, just wounded, like a boy who couldn't understand why the world had suddenly shifted under his feet. I met his gaze without blinking. "I didn't blindside anyone, Daniel. I just finally said out loud what you chose not to see." His face crumpled slightly at the edges, and for a moment, I almost reached out to him, almost softened, but I stayed still. He needed to hear this. I needed to say it. "I gave you a gift," I continued. "Not a free-for-all, not a community center. I gave you a piece of my life, my work, my love, and you let it be treated like a convenience. By people who had no claim to it." He tried to explain, to apologize, to backpedal. He said that Anna's family hadn't meant any harm, that they just needed a place to stay temporarily, that things had gotten out of hand. He promised it would be different if I let them stay. But promises made under pressure rarely hold. And I knew that better now. I listened, really listened, because that's what love still demanded. But when he finished, I simply shook my head. "I'm not selling the villa to punish you," I said. "I'm selling it because it's the only way to close the door on what's been broken." Tears filled his eyes then, and I felt the sharp, twisting pain of a mother's heart caught between love and the harder truths that love sometimes requires. I wanted to believe we could go back, that we could mend what had been lost. But deep down, I knew we couldn't, not unless Daniel was willing to truly see me again. Not just as the woman who gave him everything, but as a person worthy of respect without conditions. I stood my ground that day, soft but firm, and eventually Daniel left, shoulders slumped, the fight gone out of him. In the following weeks, the process of listing the villa moved forward. My real estate agent handled most of the details, but I went back once more to walk through the empty rooms. Anna's family had packed up quickly after my announcement, faster than I ever would have imagined. The villa was eerily quiet now, stripped of the clutter and noise that had filled it just weeks before. In the living room, the sunlight streamed through the windows onto the hardwood floors, casting long shadows that danced with the breeze. I stood there for a long time, letting the memories wash over me, letting the grief and the pride and the sorrow all rise up and settle back down. Again, selling the villa wasn't just about reclaiming the property. It was about reclaiming myself. It was about ending a chapter that had grown toxic, about drawing a line not out of bitterness, but out of hard-earned wisdom. Daniel didn't attend the closing. He sent a polite message wishing me well. I responded in kind, knowing that healing would take time if it ever truly came at all. As I handed over the keys to the new owners, a young couple just starting their life together, I felt a strange sense of peace. This time, the gift was being given with open eyes and clear boundaries. I wished them joy and love, and a home filled with mutual respect. And as I walked away, the weight I had carried for so long began to lift, replaced by a freedom so vast it almost startled me. I had lost a villa, yes. I had lost easy family gatherings and the simple comfort of being needed. But I had gained something far more precious, my voice, my dignity, and the unshakable knowledge that I was enough, even if I stood alone. In the weeks that followed the sale of the villa, a strange, quiet transformation took place within me. I had braced myself for overwhelming sadness, for regret so heavy it would make my steps falter. Instead, what I found was something far more profound, a deep, unshakable peace that wrapped itself around my days like a comforting shawl. Without realizing it, I had lived so many years weighed down by invisible expectations, trapped by a belief that my worth was measured in how much I could give, how much I could endure. I had handed over pieces of myself, small ones at first, until one day I looked up and barely recognized the woman standing there, always offering, always accommodating, always swallowing her own needs. Now, for the first time, there was space. Real space, not just in my calendar or my home, but in my soul. At first, the quiet was unnerving. I was so accustomed to noise, to requests, to demands, to obligations, that the absence of it left me unsure of how to fill my hours. There were no emergency grocery runs for last-minute family parties, no phone calls asking if I could whip up a cake, sew a costume, babysit a neighbor's child. It was just me, my house, and the life I had put on hold for too long. I woke up each morning and made coffee without the sense of urgency that had once nipped at my heels. I sat on the porch, wrapped in a blanket against the cool morning air, and watched the sun climb slowly over the horizon. I let myself linger over breakfast, reading novels instead of skimming headlines, savoring the slow unfolding of the day. Gradually, a new rhythm emerged, one rooted not in service to others, but in honoring myself. I signed up for a watercolor class at the community center, something I had once loved as a girl, but abandoned in adulthood because there had always been more important things to do. I reconnected with friends I hadn't seen in years, friends who greeted me with hugs and laughter, not with to-do lists and veiled expectations. I traveled to places I had only ever seen in postcards, small, seaside towns with colorful markets, winding forest trails that smelled of pine and rain, wide open fields where wildflowers danced in the breeze. And through it all, a small, fierce pride began to bloom inside me. I had survived the loss of things I once thought were essential: family approval, public validation, the comfort of being needed. And I had discovered that what remained was stronger, richer, and more resilient than I had ever believed possible. I didn't regret giving Daniel the villa. I didn't even regret the heartbreak that had followed. Those experiences had shaped me, had cracked me open in painful but necessary ways. They had taught me that love given freely is never wasted, even if it is not returned in the way you hoped. They had taught me that self-respect sometimes means walking away from people you love, not out of hatred, but because staying would mean betraying yourself. There were still moments, of course, when a pang of sadness would catch me off guard. A song on the radio, a photograph tucked away in an old album, a memory stirred by the scent of jasmine on a warm breeze. In those moments, I let myself grieve. I honored the love that had been real, even if it had been incomplete. I honored the woman I had been, the woman who believed that giving everything would eventually be enough. I whispered gratitude to her because she had tried so hard, loved so deeply, given so freely. And then I reminded myself that I was no longer her. I was a woman who knew better now, who chose herself without apology. The loss of the villa, the loss of old family ties, they no longer defined me. What defined me now was the quiet joy of living on my own terms, the courage it took to say, "This is enough," the strength it took to choose peace over approval. And as spring melted into summer, and my days filled with new memories and new dreams, I realized that the greatest gift I had ever given wasn't the villa or the countless sacrifices stitched through the years. The greatest gift was the one I had finally given myself: freedom. Freedom to live, to love, to exist fully and unapologetically without needing anyone else's permission. As the seasons shifted once again, I found myself marveling at how natural it felt to wake each morning, without the weight of old obligations pressing on my chest. My days no longer revolved around anticipating the next request, the next favor, the next carefully phrased expectation disguised as a question. Instead, they unfolded quietly, patiently, giving me room to breathe, to dream, to remember who I was when I wasn't busy being everything to everyone else. I filled my home with small joys: fresh flowers from the local market, books stacked high by my bedside, the smell of fresh bread baking in the kitchen on Sunday afternoons. I planted a small vegetable garden in my backyard, not because I had to feed a household, but because the simple act of tending to something that grew slowly, steadily, without demand, felt healing in a way I hadn't even known I needed. There was a sense of satisfaction in knowing that my life now fit me, like a well-worn coat, comfortable, familiar, without the constant tugging at the seams. I hosted quiet dinners for friends, people who came not to use me or what I could provide, but simply to sit, to laugh, to share stories late into the night over candlelight and homemade cobblers. There were no grand performances, no frantic efforts to impress, just honest, easy connection. And within those moments, a deep gratitude grew. Gratitude for the life I had, yes, but also gratitude for the heartbreak that had cleared the way for it. Without that painful awakening, I might still be living half a life, mistaking exhaustion for devotion, mistaking being needed for being loved. One evening, while watering the garden as the sky blushed pink with the setting sun, Daniel showed up unannounced. He stood awkwardly at the gate, hands shoved deep into his pockets, his eyes shadowed by uncertainty. I wiped my hands on a towel and walked over, heart steady, but not unkind. He asked if he could come in, and I nodded, opening the gate wider. We sat on the porch, the quiet stretching long between us. Finally, he spoke. Not in anger, not in defense, but with the halting vulnerability of someone who had been wrestling with hard truths. He apologized, not in grand, sweeping terms, but simply, honestly. He admitted he hadn't seen what was happening until it was too late. He said he missed me. I listened without rushing to absolve him, without rushing to patch over what had been broken. I let the silence do some of the work. And then I told him the truth, that I loved him, that I always would, but that love didn't mean surrendering my self-respect, that I had no intention of erasing the boundaries I had fought so hard to build. I saw the understanding flicker. In his eyes, small but genuine. It wasn't everything. It wasn't a complete restoration of what had been lost, but it was a start. A small bridge, fragile but real, stretching tentatively between us. When he left that evening, I felt a strange kind of peace settle over me. I wasn't naive enough to believe everything would be perfect from now on. Healing is never neat. Relationships don't snap back into place like rubber bands. They grow or they don't. They mend in slow, imperfect stitches, or they unravel completely. But what mattered most was that I had changed. I was no longer waiting for someone else to give me a place at their table. I had built my own. And anyone who came to sit with me there would have to understand that it was a place of mutual respect, of shared warmth, of love that didn't ask me to disappear in order to exist. For a while, things remained calm, almost too calm, as if everyone was afraid to stir the dust of what had settled between us. Daniel and I spoke occasionally, brief, careful conversations about safe topics like the weather, a new book he was reading, or a movie he thought I might enjoy. There were no deep apologies beyond the first one, no rehashing of the past, and for that, I was strangely grateful. It allowed space for something new to grow without the constant ripping open of old wounds. Yet beneath the surface, tension still brewed in the family at large, a tension I could feel even from a distance. Word had spread about the sale of the villa, about the quiet but firm stand I had taken. Not everyone understood. Not everyone approved. Some cousins called me stubborn behind closed doors. Others suggested I had been cruel to Daniel and Anna, turning a private family matter into a point of division. I didn't hear these words directly. They traveled the way gossip always does, sliding through conversations I wasn't part of, making their way back to me in snippets and sidelong glances. At first, I told myself it didn't matter. I had made my peace with the choices I had made. But the whispers grew louder when Anna's parents, stinging from their eviction from what they had treated as their second home, began weaving a different story. In their version, I was a controlling mother-in-law, obsessed with power and incapable of letting go. They painted a portrait of me that bore little resemblance to the truth, a portrait of bitterness, of selfishness, of vindictive pride. And, slowly, that version of me began to harden in the minds of people I once loved, people who had only ever known me through the lens of family gatherings and holiday toasts, who never stopped to wonder about the sacrifices made quietly behind the scenes. Invitations to birthdays and baby showers became more scarce. The few that did come felt obligatory, thick with polite distance. Conversations became stilted, punctuated with awkward silences and unspoken judgments. I saw it in their eyes, the questions they didn't ask, the assumptions they carried. It would have been easy to crumble under the weight of that misrepresentation, to rush into explanations and defenses, to try to rebuild my reputation in their eyes. But I didn't. Instead, I stayed still. I stayed quiet. I stayed true. I knew the truth of what had happened, and I knew the price I had paid to protect my own dignity. I didn't owe anyone an explanation for refusing to be treated like a doormat in the home I had worked my whole life to give. I reminded myself over and over that living with integrity often looks like rebellion to those who benefit from your silence. I reminded myself that peace doesn't come from being understood by everyone. It comes from understanding yourself. Still, there were moments when the loneliness crept in, moments when I caught myself mourning not just the loss of a house, but the loss of a place within a family that no longer quite knew what to do with me. I had stepped out of the role they had cast me in, and without it, they didn't know where I fit anymore. One Sunday afternoon, I received a group text from a family member inviting everyone to a summer barbecue at Daniel and Anna's new apartment complex. They made no mention of the villa, no acknowledgement of the year we had lost, no sign that they understood how deeply things had changed. It was as if they expected me to slip back into the fold, to bring my famous pie and smile for the photos and pretend that nothing had ever happened. I stared at the invitation for a long time, heart heavy with the weight of expectation pressing against the boundaries I had built. And then, gently, I set the phone down without replying. I spent that Sunday doing things that made my heart light. I visited a farmer's market, picking out fresh berries and honey and artisan bread. I took a long walk along the river, letting the breeze tangle through my hair, breathing in the scent of wildflowers and earth. I sat in a cozy cafe and read for hours, sipping coffee and savoring the simple joy of an afternoon spent entirely on my own terms. I didn't feel guilty, I didn't feel angry, I simply felt free. The escalation of conflict had tested me, had pushed against the fragile new life I had built for myself, had tried to tug me back into a role that no longer fit. But I held fast. I had not abandoned the woman who stood up for herself after years of being pushed aside. And in doing so, I discovered that strength isn't about never being hurt. Strength is about choosing, again and again, to stay true to yourself even when the world whispers that you're wrong for doing so. As the sun dipped below the horizon that evening, painting the sky in rich hues of amber and violet, I sat on my porch with a blanket around my shoulders and a warm mug of tea in my hands. I watched the stars begin to prick the sky with light, and I whispered a quiet promise to myself. I will not return to the life I outgrew. I will not trade my peace for their approval. I will not apologize for choosing myself. The weeks following, that unspoken choice to stay away brought a new clarity to my life, one that was sharper and more enduring than anything I had felt before. There were no more expectations to untangle, no more invitations laden with invisible strings, no more glances filled with silent accusations. My world had distilled itself down to what truly mattered: peace, self-respect, and a life lived on my own terms. I spent more time outside, working in the garden that had once been an afterthought in my busy, sacrifice-driven life. The soil was rich and forgiving under my hands, the first shoots of tomatoes and sunflowers reaching eagerly toward the sky. Watching them grow became a kind of prayer, a reminder that life, when nurtured patiently and tenderly, always finds a way to bloom again, even after being uprooted. I found myself laughing more, not the polite, strained laughter of keeping the peace, but the full-bodied laughter that comes from deep contentment. I reconnected with old hobbies, painting canvases splashed with color, writing in worn journals, late into the night, letting my heart spill out in ways it never could when I was buried under the constant expectations of others. Evenings were my favorite, sitting on the back porch with a glass of iced tea, the scent of honeysuckle filling the air, watching the sun sink into the horizon with a slow, unhurried grace that mirrored my own pace now. Then, one evening, Daniel reached out again. Not through texts or social media, but through a handwritten letter slipped quietly into my mailbox. I recognized his careful, looping script immediately and felt a familiar ache in my chest as I opened it. His words were simple, but they carried a depth I hadn't seen from him in a long time. He spoke of growing pains, of realizing too late how easy it had been to take love for granted. He didn't make excuses. He didn't shift blame. He acknowledged what had been broken and expressed a desire to rebuild, not on the shaky foundation, of past expectations, but on something stronger, something earned. I read the letter twice, then a third time, letting the sincerity of it wash over me. I didn't rush to respond. I sat with it, let it settle into my heart the way rain soaks into parched earth. Healing, I had learned, isn't a straight line. It's a series of choices made quietly, day after day, sometimes without guarantees. I knew that forgiveness, if it was to mean anything, had to be given freely, not under pressure or obligation. I also knew that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting or erasing boundaries or pretending the past hadn't left scars. It simply meant choosing to move forward without dragging the heavy weight of resentment behind me. So I wrote back, a short letter filled with honesty and cautious hope. I told Daniel that I loved him, that I was proud of the man he was trying to become, but that rebuilding trust would take time. I told him that my life was different now, shaped by choices that had cost me dearly, but had also healed me in ways I hadn't thought possible. I made it clear that I welcomed a relationship built on mutual respect, on true appreciation, but that I would never again sacrifice myself to make someone else comfortable. When I dropped the letter in the mail, I felt a lightness in my chest. Not because everything was magically fixed, but because I had honored myself first. Whatever happened next, whether Daniel and I truly rebuilt our bond or whether we simply learned to coexist from a respectful distance, I knew I would be okay. I had already weathered the storm. I had already found my center. A few days later, he called. His voice was quieter than I remembered, steadier too. We talked, really talked, for the first time in what felt like forever. We didn't rehash every painful detail. We didn't dig through old wounds. Instead, we spoke of small things, plans. For the summer, memories of long-ago family vacations, books we both wanted to read. It was tentative, fragile, like the first green shoots after a long winter. But it was real. And it was enough for now. As the sun set that evening, painting the sky in brilliant streaks of orange and violet, I sat on my porch once again, breathing in the warm, sweet air. My heart was tender but strong, full of a quiet, steady hope. I had stood up for myself when it mattered most. I had chosen dignity over convenience, truth over appearances, love over fear. And now, slowly, gently, life was offering something back. Something new, something earned, something deeply, achingly real. The slow rebuilding of my relationship with Daniel was not marked by grand gestures or sweeping declarations. It happened. Quietly, steadily, in the spaces between expectations and past hurts. We exchanged letters, small notes of encouragement tucked into each other's mailboxes. We met for coffee every few weeks, cautiously learning how to speak to one another without falling into old patterns of guilt, shame, or silent resentment. There were moments of awkwardness, to be sure, moments when the weight of everything unspoken pressed down on our conversations like heavy fog. But there was also a gentleness, a new kind of respect that hadn't been there before. Daniel no longer treated me like a given, no longer assumed that my love meant unlimited access to my time, my energy, my sacrifices. And I no longer offered myself up unquestioningly, no longer measured my worth by how much of myself I could give away. In the quiet spaces we created between us, something unexpected bloomed, a real, mutual understanding. It was not the same, as it once was. It could never be the same. Trust, once broken, never returns to its original form. It grows back differently, perhaps sturdier, perhaps more honest, but always carrying the memory of its fracture. Still, there was beauty in that. There was beauty in the choice to rebuild, to forgive, not because it was easy, but because it was necessary for peace. Meanwhile, my own life had continued to blossom. The garden behind my house thrived, a riot of color and life that made my mornings joyful and my evenings serene. I joined a local book club where discussions stretched into long, laughter-filled nights. I traveled, Nothing extravagant, but meaningful trips to places that made my soul feel wide and curious again. I learned to celebrate my own milestones. The anniversary of buying my own house outright, the small victories of mastering new skills, the daily triumph of waking up at peace with the life I had chosen. One sunny afternoon, Daniel came by with a surprise, a sapling tree, bundled in burlap and tied with a simple red ribbon. "For your garden," he said, his voice shy but sure. "A new start." Tears pricked the corners of my eyes as I accepted the gift, feeling the deep symbolism of it. Together, we planted it at the far edge of the yard where it would have room to grow tall and wide. As we pressed the rich earth around its roots, I thought about how love is like that. Sometimes it needs to be uprooted. Sometimes it needs to be replanted in new soil. Sometimes it needs to be tended to with patience and hope rather than clinging to what once was. Over time, the family that had once whispered behind my back grew quiet. Some relationships drifted away entirely, and I let them go without anger. Others softened at the edges, tentative and unsure, but not entirely lost. I stopped trying to control the narrative. I stopped trying to explain myself to people committed to misunderstanding me. I let my actions, my peace, my joy speak for themselves. Those who wanted to find their way back to me did so. Those who didn't, well, I wished them well from afar. The villa was gone, sold to a young family just starting their own journey. Sometimes I drove by it, seeing the new swing set in the front yard, the bright flowers planted along the walkway. It didn't sting anymore. It felt right. That chapter of my life had closed, but the love that had built that house, the dreams that had filled it once upon a time, had not been wasted. They had simply been redirected, replanted into a life that honored both who I had been and who I was becoming. As summer deepened and the evenings grew long and golden, I often sat on my porch with a glass of iced tea, the little sapling Daniel and I planted, casting a growing shadow across the lawn. I thought about the woman I had been, the one who gave and gave until there was almost nothing left. I honored her. I thanked her. She had gotten me this far, but I did not long to be her again. I was stronger now, softer in some ways, fiercer in others. I had learned that real love never demands you make yourself smaller to fit someone else's comfort. Real love celebrates your fullness, your boundaries, your wholeness. And as I sat there, the warm breeze stirring the leaves around me, I realized, with a clarity so profound it almost made me laugh. I had not lost my family. I had not lost my home. I had simply found myself. And that was more than enough. Sitting alone on my porch as summer fades into fall, I realized how far I had come from the woman who once believed her value was tied to the things she could give away. I had spent so many years living as if love had to be earned through sacrifice, through tireless devotion, through bending until there was almost nothing left of me. And now, in the cool hush of the evening, as leaves rustled softly in the trees and the little sapling Daniel and I planted stretched a little taller toward the sky, I understood something I had only glimpsed before. True love, real belonging, can never be built on a foundation of invisibility. It requires presence, acknowledgement, respect, the things I had once given so freely to others, but had forgotten to give to myself. Losing the villa was never really about losing a house. It was about shedding a version of myself that could no longer survive under the weight of unspoken expectations and casual disregard. Selling it, standing firm when the whispers grew louder and the invitations stopped coming, was not an act of anger. It was an act of fierce, tender self-preservation. It was saying, I matter even if you don't see it. I matter even if you never say it. It was the beginning of living my life without apology, and strangely, beautifully, life responded. New friendships blossomed, rooted in genuine care rather than obligation. My relationship with Daniel, though altered forever, grew into something more honest, something that could breathe and stretch and bend without breaking. And within myself, there bloomed a peace that was softer and stronger than anything I had ever known. There are still days when memories tug at me, holidays that once buzzed with noise and tradition, birthdays where a seat at the table used to be reserved without question. And there are still days when I miss the easy version of family I once believed I had. But those moments pass now like weather, noticeable but not defining. They do not steal my joy or make me question the path I chose. They are simply part of the tapestry of my life, threads woven through with sorrow and growth, loss and triumph. I have learned that forgiveness doesn't always mean reunion. Sometimes forgiveness is a private act, a way of setting yourself free from the anger that would otherwise keep you tied to people who may never understand the hurt they caused. I forgave Daniel and Anna, not because they asked me to, but because carrying resentment felt like dragging a heavy stone up a steep hill I no longer wished to climb. I forgave myself too, for staying silent for so long, for giving until I was empty, for believing that love had to hurt to be real. As the sun dipped low behind the trees, casting the world in a soft golden glow, I understood that this chapter of my life was not a story of loss. It was a story of reclamation. I had not lost a family. I had not lost a home. I had found my own voice, my own joy, my own unshakable center. And moving forward, I would build a life not out of obligation, but out of deliberate, loving choice. A life where I didn't have to earn my seat at the table, because the table was mine all along. And that, I realized with a quiet, certain smile, was more than enough. Have you ever had to reclaim your dignity in the face of being overlooked or taken for granted? We would love to hear your story. Share your experiences of quiet strength and self-worth in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful, emotional, true life stories that celebrate resilience, self-respect, and the courage to choose yourself.